Wow, the room got quiet. We didn't have to say anything. This is not like class at all. So good morning again. Thank you for being here. I see we're getting a few more people trickle in. I am Jenny Hamer, Jennifer Hamer. I go by Jenny. This is a conversation that I think is a good one to follow the one we had, the one that Joyce just presented us with. We will focus on inclusion, equity, belonging, and we'll talk about what that looks like for faculty members who are part of minority groups. We'll talk very specifically about the informal and formal ways that we welcome faculty, help them to feel like they belong, and give them access to what they need and what they want to be successful as they define it, but also as the institution defines it. I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second, but I want you to take a look at the screen. We have all of our folks up here. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, and we'd like to have kind of it's a formal conversation because we're on stage, but it's informal in that neither Ray or I, who are co-facilitating, like to do things in a formal way. So again, I'm Jenny Hamer. I'm going to go ahead and share with you that I'm African-American because identities are important. I'm an African-American woman. I use she, her pronouns. I'm also a parent of 2 kids and a parent of 2 dogs and a cat. I have many different titles here at Penn State. I'm a faculty member in African-American Studies and Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies. I think I may have a sociology affiliation. I'm not sure about that. I'm also the Interim Associate Vice Provost of Educational Equity, and I'm the partner here with SSRI. What other roles do I have? I'm the director of the Midcareer Faculty Advancement Program. And hopefully we'll talk a little bit about that while we're on stage today. I have an additional role as special advisor on institutional equity for the president, but I'm not wearing that hat today. So I'm here in other capacities. Ray, would you like to introduce yourself?
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to stick with the tradition and say I am also an African-American scholar, a parent of 1 child and 2 rather unruly dogs. And I wear a lot of names. And so I hold a distinguished chair position at the RAND Corporation while also working as a professor with an endowed position in the McCourtney Institute, which means that I got a bunch of people's names attached to mine too, right? The reason why I'm here is because I care very deeply about faculty development in all ways, shapes, and forms. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation as it goes. He, him pronouns, and I look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Ray. So, Jeanine?
Yes, good morning, everyone. My name is Jeanine Staples-Dixon. I'm a professor in the College of Education, Literacy and Language. I have affiliations with African American Studies and Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies. I'm a senior faculty mentor with Jenny over in Educational Equity. I am cishet. I go with she, her pronouns. I think that's all I'll share.
Hi, I'm Vescio. I'm a professor of psychology with an affiliation in Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies. Let's see, I'm a kid of teenage parents. I grew up in poverty as a queer kid, married my best friend and claimed heterosexual privilege with 2 gay parents raising 2 not straight kids. And then the world found out we were gay. I mean, the world knew we were gay, but then I came here and the world found out I was gay. So I have the lens of a concealable stigma when people realized it and did not. And that comparison is very interesting. And there's some stark differences. I think that's it. Oh, I go by she, her. You can also use they, them.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Steve Wilson. I'm also a professor in the psychology department. Been here since 2008. I think in terms of identity, the biggest thing for me is a parent of 4 children, ranging in age from 8 to almost 20. dog owner. Somehow we ended up with 2 cats recently. My wife's not super happy about that. I think in terms of how some of the things we'll probably talk about intersect with my identity. I'm biracial, a Black father, white mother. And that's not always sort of obvious. And so that has definitely kind of colored the way I kind of experience things. It's great to be here.
Thank you.
I also just want to say, when I said queer, I identify as a lesbian woman and raised kids with a person who didn't identify as straight. So.
Thank you again. So the reason we're starting with identities is because those things actually matter. Who we are, what we look like, how people perceive us matter after we are hired. They certainly matter during the search process, and that's a conversation we'll have in workshops. But what I really want to focus on is how do we keep people here once they are here and they want to stay? Because what we'll talk about with deans is people leaving, right? Even when they may want to stay. And so there are things that we do when faculty, once we hire people, they come to Penn State, even in the process of getting to Penn State after the hire, there are things that we do sort of on a routine basis, things that we take for granted in terms of how we welcome people into our respective communities. It could be a department, could be a college, could be the institution overall. But it's also the communities that surround us, where we live. Now, it happens that everyone up here is from University Park, and I'm only going to assume that they're living in State College. They could be living anywhere, but they do engage in the surrounding community that is State College and Center County. So those things actually matter too. And so when we invite people, new people to our campus, there are certain things that we do, right? Someone takes us out to coffee, invites us out to coffee. Or maybe if we have children, we may connect them with a teacher or with other families that have children. Those are things that we, that we really don't think about, that we do on a routine basis. The thing of it is that we don't do it for everyone in the same way, right? We tend to reach out to people who look like us, who share something in common with us. And those are the people we kind of take and put an arm around and really welcome. And when we do that, that's not just social, it's also professional, right? Because the person that you just put your arm around now has access to you, your networks, you as a source of information, you as a mentor, right? As a connector, right? And you may reach out to them as they're going up for promotion and say, hey, let me read your narrative statement. Hey, let me look at your CV. Or if you're writing a grant, why don't you join me on this grant? Why don't you join this professional association? All of that information, right, is really important when we think about what faculty need to be successful. And when I define success at this moment, and everyone can have their own definition, it's about that promotion and tenure process, how we define success, right, as academics, even though, of course, it's much more complicated than that. But that's the conversation that we want to have today. And so we've asked our 3 guests up here to talk about it. And oftentimes talking about identities really isn't easy at all, right? We really just want to be faculty members or administrators, but it's a lot more complicated than that when you're part of a minority group. There's one more identity I have, and that's as a person with a disability. It's an invisible one, and people don't realize it, right? But for me, just as an example, being invited to a big party or being invited to speak, and Ray's here because sometimes speaking is actually a struggle for me, so he's here as a co-facilitator. But so I think Joyce said something about being intentional. And so the purpose of this conversation is to help us be more intentional in terms of how we think about identities and how they matter, who we invite, who we did not invite, and the conversations we have with them when we're sitting with them across the table or supporting them as colleagues in other ways. So I think Ray's going to kind of throw out a question. We're going to throw out questions and everyone will have an opportunity to respond. Ray and I may join in with our own experiences at a certain point in terms of housekeeping. This is a conversation that lasts until 11:30, at which time you get to take a break and then eat lunch. And I think that's essentially it. We will open the floor at a certain point so that you can also ask questions. And of course, people will respond in ways that, and if they're comfortable responding. So, okay, right?
So to get us started, I like to think of this first question as being a question where we share experiences and perspectives and things like that. To add some contour to this, I want you to think about this. So minority group members often report that in transitions to new institutions, they feel uncertain, uncomfortable, and not completely welcomed by the majority group colleagues. They report similar experiences about neighborhoods and schools. Can you tell us how what I just told you jives with your experiences or not as you transition to Penn State and into a new living community? Now, specifically, I want you to think about the following. How did you navigate challenges if you had them? Were there individual groups, resources, et cetera, that would have been helpful? And if there were, what specifically made a difference? If we can use that to get us going, I'd appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you for that really helpful introduction. Thank you for the question. I'd like to start off by saying, I love Penn State and I'm happy here. Now, that's an interesting thing to say as a Black woman who's a faculty member, because very few, I think, Black women faculty are happy at Penn State. So when I think about why that is, Jenny helps me to think about that all the time because she asks me the question, why are you happy here? And so I think I can go back and nail down why. This was not my first job. My first job out of grad school was at the University of Maryland, College Park, where I had a terrible experience as a junior faculty member, as a Black woman. I made the assumption that I'm a Bison, Howard University. And so I thought, oh, I'll be in DC. You know, there's a great context for Blackness, for connection, and I'll be happy there. And I wasn't. And it wasn't the city, it was the institution. I was in a place where the head and of the department and the program and the dean weren't really ready for me. And they didn't really know what to do with me. So there was a DEIB push, you know, and so they looked, I mean, I'm qualified. And so they looked at me along with a lot of other people. I got the job because I was the best candidate. And they brought me in, but had no preparation for my presence or to support me. And also, not only was there no preparation for my presence and no support structures in place to help me to acclimate and to really support my genius, they had not only not prepared themselves, but they had not prepared anyone else affiliated or associated with the experience of bringing on a faculty member. And that includes not only the logistical support structures that need to be in place, but also the interpersonal work that needs to be done among leadership who have not checked their biases, who have not checked some of the stereotypes that are driving their decision-making or their perception. And there was a lot of projected energy on to me, a lot of expectations, and I wanted to get out of there. And Penn State basically came calling. When I came to this campus, I remember flying in to the airport. It was a blizzard. It was January. It was spectacularly beautiful. I stepped off of the plane and I remember saying, I'm home. It was an ethereal experience. I still feel that way today. And a part of the reason is because I think it is my professional home. That's why I've thrived here. But also, I prepared myself to come out of that terrible experience and recreate a wonderful experience at my next institution. I knew that I needed to do things to help the program, the department, the college, the university see me, understand me, and I needed to cultivate a voice that could ask for things that I knew I needed. I had to do an inventory check to figure out what I needed and what I wanted, and just be ready and prepared to be present for myself, to be my own best advocate for myself, to find mentors and sponsors there. But my preparation was met with preparation. So when I came here, I had a dream team of program chair, department head, and dean who clearly prepared for me, who clearly had a very unified, energetically anchored stance towards me. And the several other faculty of color that they brought in, diverse faculty in many ways, for my cohort. And we met each other, my preparation met their preparation, and we synergistically exploded. And I have felt supported and valued from the beginning. Even when the leadership changed, as it does, I still felt valued and seen. And so what I would say, I think this answers Ray's question, and if not, I'm happy to rephrase, but I think what happened was I could clearly tell that the people who were in leadership in my program, my department, and my college took a lot of time to think about the vision for all of those levels, who I was and the vision I had for my career and my contribution to the field, and create matches. And I know that was a lot of work and effort for them, and it paid off in spades. So I'll say that.
I think that was a really beautiful response to the question. And I would just add maybe one thing about my own experience. I would say I feel very lucky. I've had a very positive experience at Penn State, and generally I've felt very welcomed in my department. I think the thing that really was helpful for me was coming in with other faculty members and having colleagues in the department who were pre-tenure. And there was sort of organically, we formed a group, and we would meet regularly and have lunch. And I think that was super helpful for me in terms of expectations and sort of sharing information that as we were sort of going through the process together. And again, that happened organically. So I think in terms of thoughts for the future, if there are ways to sort of cultivate that amongst particularly new faculty members in departments. And I know that's something that all people always think about, but that was one thing that stood out for me. The other thing, I guess, coming here, State College is very different from where I grew up. And so that was a big adjustment. There have definitely been times where I haven't felt particularly welcome in the community outside of the university. And I think connecting with people on a personal level through my children and their activities, through our church, things like that have been a big benefit and have really helped to facilitate the process. But a little bit about my experiences.
So when I came, there were a lot of years where I was the only gay person in the Department of Psychology. And I've been here for a very long time. So I was hired in '99. I think when you have a concealable stigma, I think people say things and you find out where people stand along a spectrum. And so it was, so I allowed people to think I was straight. So it wasn't the best experience. So the university was this amazing resource, supporting my research, providing great resources. And when I think about what was great and what was instrumental in my success were two things. The senior women in the department who swooped in and mentored and provided resource, and the senior women across the department that had found out that I had a women's studies undergraduate degree and linked me with women's studies where there was all this diversity and acceptance, and they have always known who I was. And so I think that that community and the multiple communities were helpful. Like there was all this research. This was a terribly difficult community. There are no public gay spaces still to this day. I came from a Lawrence, Kansas, where I moved in 1992, and you would see gay people walking around holding hands all the time. And that started happening here about 4 or 5 years ago. And it was just 2 weeks ago that I saw the first 2 gay men holding hands. I've only seen like 4 couples of women holding hands, and now it's not a gay friendly place. And so it's funny how the community becomes your department in a way that I wouldn't have expected, because that's actually the opposite of how it was in more liberal locations, Berkeley, University of Minnesota, University of Kansas. Actually, Lawrence, Kansas is much more liberal in that sense, the city, than here. So I think those are things to keep in mind. Yeah.
So Thank you very much, because that actually helped me to think about, brought back memories, not all of them great, but, Penn State is a great institution. There are a lot of great institutions, and I think we can be greater if we're more intentional, right, about how we welcome people in and support them. And I like what Jeanine was saying is that, it is clearly you do have to be intentional. One of the things that y'all didn't talk about is how you decided where to live. So if you're a department head, right, or an associate dean, and you are kind of in charge of helping to orient faculty, one of the things that faculty of color and other marginalized groups have to think about is, where am I going to live in this city, right? Where are the safe spaces? Because every place doesn't have safe spaces. State College is an interesting place, right, if you're African American, and that we're kind of everywhere, right? In Lawrence, Kansas, there it's kind of the same. I used to live in Lawrence, Kansas. We weren't there at the same time. But when you have spaces like that, it suggests that you don't have a large Black population. We're just kind of sprinkled everywhere, right? Which can be even more isolating. But those are the kind of things you have to think about if you're trying to identify a realtor. Is this a realtor who is going to work well with these particular clients, right? And it's not something you can almost ask the client, what is it that you're looking for? What type of realtor are you looking for? And then you help them from there instead of you deciding what it is, what they need. One of the things we do with the Mid-Career Faculty Advancement Program is to try to be that community. We're coming in late though, we're doing it for associate professors. But this, in terms of moving, transitioning, feeling welcome, it happens at every level, not just the early career stage, but at the associate level and at the full professor stage. So maybe we'll come back and talk a little bit more about specifics in terms of your transition. That would be great. And of course, if you have questions, that are specifics, you should ask them. But right now I kind of want to move to, okay, you're here. Welcome to Penn State. And everyone is actually very kind, that is just very true. That's been my experience. But it's the little things, as Terry was saying, that people might say things without realizing that they're saying something about how they feel about your presence or value you. And so I'd like for you to kind of think through that tenuring process. And all of you have been promoted to full at this point, but the tenuring process and what that looked like for you. So just very, very quickly, I started my career at Southern Illinois University. I was the first woman and the first Black person to be hired in the Department of Sociology. I'm also first gen, right? So I didn't really know anything about, I didn't even know what tenure was. I'll be honest with you, I did not know. I just knew it was something. So I didn't sweat about it because I figured if they didn't keep me, I would just go get another job. That's just how you do, right? As a working class human being. But I didn't really have folks kind of around me helping me, and I didn't know who to ask. Eventually I found those folks. But I wonder if you can talk about it. I went to Southern Illinois University. It was smaller. This is a huge space. So how did you navigate that position here, right? Trying to figure out what you're supposed to know, who do you go to in a comfortable way? Yeah.
Yeah, I would say I had a head start. I was mentored as an undergraduate to go through the tenure process. So Cynthia Dillard, who's one of my mentors, she's not at Ohio State anymore. Gosh, she's moved a few times. She was at Georgia, now she's, I think, in Seattle. She supported me as an undergraduate by granting me a fellowship to Ohio State to study and understand the professorate and understand what it meant to do research. So I had an idea early on of what it looked like and what it meant. By the time I got to Penn State, I had been coached really well by my mentors to seek support inside of the university and outside of the university. What I'll say is that as a senior faculty mentor, I have spoken to many minoritized faculty members, members of the global majority, who are minoritized here, who may not feel completely comfortable understanding how racist or sexist or phobic an institution can be. Even with all of the marketing and the messaging about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, the infrastructure of most institutions here in the West are deeply racist and sexist and phobic without realizing it. And so it can trip up a new faculty to think, well, they said all these things about support and how I'll be helped through the tenure process, but nobody's helping me, or I'm getting mixed messages, or I feel clueless or uncertain or unsure. A part of my job is to support the university in eliminating those biases and understanding how to identify them and dismantle them, but also simultaneously helping junior faculty who are minoritized in this context to understand not to hold their breath. I mean, hold the institution to an expectation or a standard that they profess, but not to hold up your career or your happiness or your personal safety or security waiting for them to figure it out. So I had a team of people outside of this institution and people inside of this institution to advise me and support me and answer questions and to coach me to develop the professional and personal attributes that would benefit me and to support me and secure my success. So yeah, having people read my narrative statement, give me examples of dossiers that I could look at as models to emulate were really, really helpful. And just support me also in even before I developed the dossier or the narrative statement to really get my publication life together with a really aggressive set of standards for myself that I could maintain on my own or with other people. Found out very quickly, for example, that I don't work well on teams. I don't publish well with other people. So it was better for me to hunker down and publish by myself. And I published a gazillion pieces on my own. If I had tried, for example, to fit into someone else's paradigm and take the advice that someone had to give me to say, find people to publish with, it'll be easier, you'll have a better time, I would have probably failed. So it was also having mentors who could see me, understand where my gifts and talents were, where my passions were, and could direct and support me, again, intentionally. So I went through the P&T process, again, with that dream team of people, that department head and the deans who were really, really ready for me. But then I also had support structures that I had built on my own.
I worked with, when I was picking graduate schools, I was totally illogical, and my dad kept saying, no matter where you go, you'll be fine. It's just hard work. It's beautiful. But anyway, I followed my gut and I picked, and I had undergraduate mentor in women's studies and philosophy helping me pick a social psychologist. And I picked an advisor who was a first-generation American and first-generation college student. And I was her first student. So I went through the tenure process with Monica, and she was an amazing mentor in terms of telling me and helping me realize what has to be different about my behavior in academics versus at home, because they're wildly different gender roles, they're wildly different expectations, social capital, all those things. So I was very lucky to have my advisor at Monica Burnett. That led to a network of women, Trish Devine at Wisconsin, this network of women who were also first-generation college students who kind of took me under my wing, and since have taken all of my first-generation college students that graduate under their wing. And so that's been huge. So when I think about what we would need going forward, I think mentors don't have to be from the same group. I actually don't. I think but that we have to be careful with mentoring to make sure that the mentors are really super motivated to hear in non-defensive ways and learn about. And so mentoring requires figuring out who you're working with, but also seeking advice and counsel for how to work with that student. So for example, when I worked with one of my students who's a first-generation American, who's a first-generation college student, who's a native Spanish speaker, I spent a lot of time consulting with colleagues, reading books, asking him, what are the differences? Because it would be really, really super easy, and I do this all the time. Like, I'm from poverty, but a Latino kid who's a first-generation American from poverty is not the same as me in all these ways. So figuring out what he needed, and then picking what postdocs carefully, and I messed that up, and we lost him. He made it all the way through graduate school, went to a postdoc, and I thought I picked my best colleagues, and he was still overwhelmed, and I still lost him out of academics, 6 months short of a job. So I think we can do it, but it takes some thought that we would have to think together how to do it to mentor in that way. But I was good. There were all sorts of senior women in the department from really privileged backgrounds in women's studies that were amazing and supported me. And I'm just so utterly grateful.
So I guess probably a combination of my personality, my background, my identity. I always tend to feel kind of out of place, and it's hard for me to kind of feel comfortable particularly in social settings and with groups and things like that. And so I have struggled with overcoming some of those barriers. Certainly pre-tenure all the way through the promotion to professor. And I think I tend to really like to fade into the background and not put myself out there. And so for me, it's been really helpful to connect with people who complement and maybe offset some of those limitations or shortcomings. And so, I've had great mentors here who are really outgoing and really push me to, I learned things, and this is probably, this is not necessarily pre-tenure. This is even, I just got promoted in July, and even recently I learned that people put themselves, ask other people to promote them and put them up for awards, or ask people to invite them for talks. And these are things that are really important for networking. And it never occurred to me that you would put yourself out there in that way. So having mentors who, would, encourage me to do those things was really helpful. The other thing is I try to maintain, because it does take some time for me to build relationships, to maintain those relationships that I had formed. Like in grad school, I had a really close relationship with my graduate advisor. And so I would always go to them with questions throughout the process. And that's been super helpful for me as well.
So I just want to say what Stephen just described, right? Knowing that you should be on certain boards, right? Or you should be on editorial committees, those sorts of things, right? So that's information that really everyone should have from the giddy up, right? But everyone doesn't get it, right? It really depends on who's part of your network. So congratulations, Stephen, on your promotion. And I think okay. Because even part of that, like that narrative statement, one of the things that we have found with associate professors is that they actually don't believe they're as great as they are. And our job in reading a narrative statement is helping them to describe who they are and what they've contributed, right? In a way that makes clear their significant contribution. But they forget how to do that here at Penn State, because I really haven't seen it elsewhere. So I'm just saying it's Penn State. I'm not saying it's only Penn State, but I've been at 4 other institutions, and this is the only place where I've seen that struggle for associate professors and defining their contribution to the field. And so it's those sorts of things that I would argue we need to make more formal, right? It's because a lot of that information comes informally. Hey, someone just happened to tell me that I should, right? And we're seeing mid-career faculty members who haven't developed that CV. They haven't done the level of service or the range of service that they should have completed by now. All of those things matter, and it's just that not everyone has access to the information that they need to build that CV that spell out success and accomplishment. So really, I appreciate you sharing that, Stephen. And as you think about being more intentional, right, as a department head, as an associate dean, as a dean, those are the things that I think we're trying to get at. What are the things that we need, right, to provide to all faculty at every single stage of their career, even after they are full, so that they feel that they're welcome, that they're contributing, and that they're valued here at Penn State. I think we're going to do one more question, and then we're going to open it up.
I feel like we're moving in this direction already. And so I'm going to call it service creep. And a lot of you will understand this and you'll feel it in your bones before I even start to describe it. But the situation, as it often plays out, is that minority group faculty members find themselves being asked to perform service at levels that, let's face it, are well above the expectations for their colleagues. And that's difficult. This is especially difficult at the junior level, which is where you see some of the most egregious instances of what I'm calling service creep. So since we're talking about service creep, I want to know if you'd be okay sharing your experiences with this issue so that we can brainstorm ways of working around this issue.
Yeah, I think that's a really important issue. My perspective in the department I'm in, the psychology department, I think generally the department is very good about protecting junior faculty from some of that service creep. So I think I've been very fortunate. I felt that people were very mindful when they've asked me to serve on things, and but I know that that's not been everyone's experience. And so while I feel fortunate, I've definitely recognized that other people are being asked to do lots and maybe more than they should be asked. So.
I think that there's both formal and informal ways, and sometimes we miss the informal that happens. So all but one of my students have been first generation college students. I was a first generation college student. And I didn't realize how much work it was, how much more work it was until I had this last student who was not a first generation college student, and how much easier it is. So a first generation college student comes in, and this includes me, I'm not talking about other people. So I had an advisor that helped me. The amount of time I spend with graduate students isn't comparable to the amount of time other people spend with graduate students. And it's really clear to me now. The amount of time I spend writing, how many times we go back and forth, their expectations of how much feedback I get so high because that's what it takes to publish. And so, so I think there's, and I don't really know what to do with that at an administrative level, but as we seek to increase diversity of some sorts, from the background I'm from, that involved a lot more work for my advisor, and my graduate students involve a lot more work for me. And I want to do it, but I meet with graduate students, every single week, twice a week for students who are struggling to write. I write with them one-on-one sometimes, and all of these things are invisible service that takes tons of hours if they're going to be academics. And it would be easy to let them not be academics. And I feel really kind of crummy about this right now, but like I'm taking a break because I just had a student that's not from that underrepresented, that kind of first gen background. And my life was so much easier, and I need a little bit of a break right now. So my 2 incoming students are not. So I have now 3 in a row from not first gen backgrounds. But I want to do that work. And so I think at an administrative level, we can figure out how to support that a little bit better if we want that. And if we don't want that, then it's just up to the individual faculty member, but I just want to point out that invisible side too.
So for service, when I think about service, the way that I've supported my department in thinking about service is to maintain that notion of protecting assistant professors from overextending themselves in service, even though of course it's necessary to be considered for P&T. There's a way that we can find a balance. And I agree for mid-career professors, when I was in that position, I knew that we were going to get dumped like at the mid-career, like with lots and lots and lots of service. And so the idea that I bring to my department is how can we be strategic in how we ask people to serve? There are service opportunities in the department that align with people's interests or just align with their gifts and their talents. Some of it does feel like grunt work. It's really logistical, a little bit tedious, but some people like doing stuff like that. I think you got to find the people who want to do it. And then there are other service initiatives that are more innovative and creative and more dynamic that people feel excited about. I think it's also really helpful, if it's true for the people who are doing the work, to imagine how any service opportunity can be collaborative. When I was the chair of the faculty senate, for example, faculty council for the College of Education, I did it twice on my own and realized that although I could do it and I did well, it's not like writing where I want to be by myself and on my own. I'd rather have somebody to do this work with. So I talked to the department and the college about making it a co-led position, and it worked beautifully. And so I think being creative and innovative inside of the service opportunities and thinking about how people fit and can thrive. And sometimes it's not about thriving. Service is just about getting it done. But in any case, being thoughtful, I think, can make a big difference.
Can I say one more thing here too? I'm in a big department and I'm affiliated with a small department, and small departments don't have that, don't have the same buffers. Like, we were protected in this amazing way in psychology where there's a lot of people, and in WGSS where there's more underrepresented group members, proportionally and by raw numbers, you can't protect the same way. So I'm not sure what the solution is there, but a lot of times we give answers that speak to the biggest departments. So I would like to think about that a little bit, and how some of the things might be done by committee work, or some of the tasks might be done by hiring staff and freeing up some time so we could buffer the assistant. Because I think there's a lot of work that gets done by faculty and we could buffer a little bit, but those are just some ideas.
Or there's some things that we just don't get done, right,
Or
when we're in
some things that
small
don't get
units,
done,
right? So I'll just talk just very briefly about the Mid-Career Faculty Advancement Program. One of the things that we do in that program is help people to think about, we coach people on their service. Because one of the things that we found is that among the 20 faculty members that we had in the pilot is that they were over-serviced and they didn't know how to say no. They didn't know it was okay to say no. They were afraid of retaliation in some form, right, if they said no to a committee. And so part of my job as director was helping them to say no. And I'm looking at a few people in the room, some who ignored my advice, by the way. But it's really important as a department head, I think, and also as a dean, associate dean, to be considerate, right, of those who do struggle with that. And it's oftentimes women, and it's oftentimes people of color who find it challenging to say no to committee service. For one thing, some of us feel compelled, right? Someone needs to do this work. Someone needs to be there for the students. But in reality, it's everyone's work. And it's a lot easier to let the minority group member, the minoritized person, do the work. It saves you from having to think about it, right? It saves you from having to engage. It makes your life easier. But what it does is it sets up these other groups, right, for failure and dissatisfaction. So I do think we can be more intentional about service. There's no reason we couldn't have bylaws, right, that define, limitations on service at every single stage. We kind of do that in practice when it comes to junior faculty. But once we get to the associate level, all bets are off. And that's when we find people, struggling in particular. So I think what we would like to do at this point is ask you if you have any questions. Before I do that, I want to say congratulations to 2 other faculty members who were promoted, Lawanda, Jose. Jose was part of the Mid-Career Faculty Advancement Program. And thank you for being here. Any questions from the floor? You can ask us anything. Yes. Microphone. We can take one of these. Take that one. It's fine. Can you introduce yourself before you speak? Thanks.
Hi, Kristen Buss, professor and head of the Department of Psychology. On the last point and conversation about service, something struck me as part of the solution. It's how to get those faculty who refuse to do service, right? Who are so bad at it, we don't want them to do it. Like, they're either intentionally bad at it or they're just, in academia because they wouldn't succeed elsewhere, right? Kind of people. But how do we really motivate, right, people to care? Right? Like, Terry, which you and I've talked about before, but that story about like how much more effort it takes to mentor some students for a variety of reasons, right? And how we don't really acknowledge that. And how do we get the rest of the faculty to step up and support you know, those service responsibilities without feeling like you're pulling teeth. I think that's part of the solution. I don't have the answer, but it reminds me of earlier, right? There was the statement that struck out to me is that like mentoring isn't just about the individual, it's about everyone. Like it has to be about everyone, the whole structure and the whole system that you're part of.
I mean, you don't have the answer and you're in psychology, so, but what you're talking about is an ethic of care. It's an ethic of care, right? So for some people, you know, they sort of step into roles and they care, right? And it's not a performance. And I think you're asking for the performance, right? Because in other words, if this is your job, as part of your job description, we expect you to do it. You need to perform it for these students, right? For your colleagues. But we have a hard time doing that, even as department heads. I'm a former department head twice over, or 3 times, I can't remember. It's really hard, right? Because you're asking your colleagues to do something they don't want to do. That's a whole nother conversation with department heads and leadership and managing personnel. But, you know, we do have expectations, and the problem is that we will hold some people to their expectations and not others. And the ones we hold to it are the ones that make it easy for us. So no answer. Yeah. Other questions or anyone else up here?
I have a question on a response to Kristen. Like you were saying how we can put service in bylaws, you know, and if we just have a basic breakdown, just hypothetically, I'm not saying we all agree, but let's just say across the university, we agree research is 60%, teaching is 30%, service is 10%. Of a 40-hour work week, that's 4 hours of service or whatever it is. Can we just assign people to things that would take that long and everybody has some assignment? Like in a department of 50 people, everybody has some assignment, because I think we have people who have no assignments. And so I don't know, does that just not work? As somebody who's never been a head. I'm just asking. I'll look at the heads back there like, yeah.
I think
So-
you can do that. Oh, there's another head. Go ahead, or former head.
Yeah.
Yep.
I've been ahead and I implemented that where every committee and task had a number of hours that it took and everyone was assigned a number of points in, yeah. And the reason I did it is because I knew some people were over-serviced, right? In particular, the women in my department. And I would bank points for this year and next year so that, you know, sometimes you have to ask somebody to go over and above, but I say, okay, next year we're going to go a little easier. And it really surprised me how keeping track of it in such a detailed way, you know, I was trying to be so equal in how I partitioned things, but I still found that if I would calculate how many overage points certain groups got, it was always more to the women anyway. You know, like no matter what I did, it was still ending up being not quite balanced. But it worked.
Oh, Joyce. Wendy, can you bring up? Thanks.
Hi, I'm Joyce. I was just going to give one book recommendation, which is there's this book out called The No Club. And in the book, it has something called non-promotable tasks. That's the main concept in here. And it sort of speaks to this, and it's offering structure and like having people, both individuals, understand what they're doing in the non-promotable task space, and also having unit heads also look at it along the lines of what Wendy was doing. So thanks.
I hope someone's keeping track of the books, the book list. Another question?
Karen, you too. Okay. Yeah, Karen Murphy, Department Head of Educational Psychology, Counseling, and Special Education. Thank you so much. Terry, it's been forever since I've seen you. Thank you so much for the input. This is my 4th year as a department head, and I have to tell you, it's like a mystery to me how we make decisions that really benefit faculty in an inclusive way. And I guess I'm wondering if you could give me some insights. One of the things that we're trying to do is build collaborative support networks instead of using the word mentoring. We're trying to think through the ways in which we move away from sort of an assimilationist viewpoint. Okay, so in doing that, I stumble a bit on asking faculty what they need for fear I can't provide it. Because faculty often ask for things that you know, we have a new budget model, everybody feels it, that we can't provide. And so I try to think of alternative ways to provide it. But I wondered if there's some thoughts that folks have about that. How do we do that in a way that that also continues to build faculty's feeling of support and collaboration to the extent, Jeanine, that they want it, right? So how do we do that in a way that's productive for the faculty that we're trying to build this relationship with and this support network?
Well, I think that that could work. It depends on the faculty in mind. For the faculty who have no idea what they want or what they would need to be successful, they just know they want to be successful. Sometimes offering a list, you know, this is what we have offered in the past and it seemed to work well for these reasons. These are things we could offer, but nobody's ever asked for. And we think that that could work well for a number of reasons. I think offering a list and then how the thing on the list is a support structure, how it functions specifically as a support structure, like what it can do, like what sort of outcomes or results it can provide for the new faculty member or the mid-career faculty member would be helpful, a helpful start for some people. For other people who have a list in mind, who know what they want and have given it some thought, I would say I've never been a department head. I have no aspirations whatsoever to take on that role. I would say ask the people who know what they want, and just be ready to say no to whatever you cannot provide, and then just explain why you can't provide it.
Also, I think that we underestimate sometimes what's really important. I think very clear guidelines on what's expected that are articulated very clearly. I'm a stereotyping and prejudice researcher. And so using evaluative criteria that are the same across candidates and don't allow for that slippage. So what is good for one person is not good. So you want externally anchored sorts of evaluative criteria as opposed to subjectively anchored excellent, not excellent, which allow for this slippage of what's excellent for a man when you have less expectations for a service is not the same as what's excellent for a woman. So I would say, you know, really clear. I got lucky coming into psychology. The head at the time is somebody who's been gone for years. But Keith Cernick was really super good at telling us what was required to get tenure. And the range, you know, the person who got tenure with the least number of publications had 8, and they were all in superstar journals. The most denied was 28. And like this really clear, it's about evaluation quality and talking to you every year about what wasn't required and what made him nervous about where you're spending your time. But I really think that what we lose track of, especially as we're talking about SRTE evaluations and these open-ended are the bane of existence for that shifting standard and what women get held to, Black people get held to, people of color, gay people. So anyway, I would say starting with that really common and you're sure it's being applied is really nice and helpful to people. It was really super helpful to me.
So I'll just add in terms of like helping especially maybe vulnerable or early career faculty when it comes to things they need. I'll throw out a barrier, at least what seems to be a barrier in my perspective. I don't have any idea about exactly what to do about it, but I certainly have seen, because a lot of things that we're talking about seem to connect to the idea of community and collaboration and sharing. And there are certainly people who hoard resources, and the rich get richer, and the people who are like doing really well by a lot of metrics will tie up a lot of resources. And I think as a vulnerable faculty member, it's hard to kind of get things that you might need and have things distributed more equitably. And I don't know how our incentive structure is set up to, I think, reinforce that a lot. And I don't know how to combat that, but that is something that I think has affected people, particularly when they're early on.
So we only have, I think, 2 more minutes or something like that. I just want to say that the other thing that we provide or try to facilitate through mid-career advancement is transparency on processes, transparency on expectations for promotion. because without that, what we found is that many faculty who were very close to promotion, they could be advanced, didn't believe that they had what they needed to advance. It's also very simple, just transparency. So once again, it's about informal. So the people that you see advancing are people who have access to the information about what it takes, right? The other thing was, you asked, you want to know what to provide, you're concerned about, they'll say something that they don't. Oftentimes faculty don't really know what they need. I ended up doing the Mid-Career Faculty Advancement Program and directing it because it was initially envisioned by a mid-career faculty member who really did not know what they needed to advance. So I guess what I'm saying is don't overthink it. We don't need to overthink it. I think we need to talk out details and talk out intentionality, but that should be based on some very transparent expectations for promotion, very transparent expectations for service, right? And for teaching. So let me check my watch. One more question? Angela?
So this is a response to Theresa's comment. For promotion and tenure, your open-ended feedback from students will not be in your dossier in the future, not. You will get open-ended. There are open-ended items in the new student feedback system, the new teaching assessment framework that the Senate passed in April. We're working on getting resources up for that, but I mean, that's a good piece of news because that was highly problematic in how people interpreted the written feedback. So that will be interpreted by a trained committee of peers.
Yeah, who's aware of gender and racial bias, right?
Yes.
I think that's a wrap unless there's one more question out there. Ray, any closing? Anyone? Oh, Corrali?
So I think one thing that's, oh, there's somebody in the chat. One thing that's been worrying me, and I worry a lot, is I've had some PNT roles, and I think we all had a very acute response to COVID. We were all going through it. The first round of people going through PNT or evaluation after COVID, we thought about it. My concern is that we're losing that memory of what it was like. And that, if you think back to March of 2020 and compare it to how you're doing now, but all of those downstream effects are hitting now. The fact that you didn't collect data in 21 or your paper didn't get done. And we all know that that COVID had a disproportionate impact on low SES, people of color, women who are taking care of entire households, Zoom call over here, Zoom school over there. How do we remind and jog the memories of both internal committee members, but also external letter writers? If you look at the CV in 2024, remember something happened in 2021 where they didn't have the pipeline that they would have expected. And how do we say that without setting up lower expectations like, oh, she's not that good? No, she's awesome, but she was running an entire household for a year and a half in her basement.
The easiest, simplest, most direct thing to do is just make it a policy statement. Like develop a policy statement that's included in P&T protocols and also in the letters that deans send out for external reviewers. Just create a clause that simply says, if you see a hole in this CV between 2020 and 2022 or whatever. Pardon? Yeah. I still stand with my statement, make a clause, place it in formal documents for everyone, and stand by that clause. It would need to define the parameters. We can't go on forever, but we are in the residual effects of that season of the pandemic, for sure. We just need to put it in writing. We need to agree and then put it in writing.
So we're going to close with that. But since you brought up COVID, we did actually survey our mid-career faculty advancement fellows during that period and asked them how they were doing. And what we found is that the majority, and these were all faculty of color, reported that they felt a lot better not having to interact with their colleagues, right? So it was actually more comfortable, and despite all of the other things that you were just mentioning, right? They were actually very comfortable at home and not having to engage. So, so that is a wrap. Thank you very much for your attention and for your questions.
So I